Welcome everyone to this live town hall. My name is Reverend Dr. Katie Gibbons-Keim, and I'm the Director of Religion and Civic Engagement at Odyssey Impact. So a quick bit about Odyssey. We're an interfaith media nonprofit, which drives social change through innovative storytelling and media, connecting faith and secular communities. We are the producers of the film series Healing the Healers, which provides faith leaders and educators with conversations like these today. Intimate conversations about how it really is in the most challenging spiritual care and justice crises. We are thrilled, so thrilled to be partnering today with Religion News Service and with the On Being Project. Together, these two organizations are at the forefront of reporting the stories of religious leaders, traditions, and practices in today's world, and uplifting questions of how we might be together. We're excited to think together about the role that religion and media can play as we look ahead to a post-2020 world. In our past town halls, we have found some aspects of beloved community together via the use of the chat feature in Zoom. So feel free to type hello from your context. I see several folks have done that. We are also so glad to have two chat moderators, Ben Kott, who's the Associate Director of Religious Life and Social Healing at the On Being Project, and also Paul O'Donnell, who is Editor-in-Chief for Religion News Service. A special note, today's town hall has been extended to 75 minutes with a very special treat at the end that you will not want to miss. For our town halls, we dedicate a lot of time to talking with all kinds of change makers and practitioners to shape relevant and interesting conversations. Specifically for today, in gathering these four other amazing humans who are on the screen, we talked together about the importance of, especially in this very divisive time, not being constrained by less helpful one-dimensional labels and categories like red states, blue states, etc. So, panelists, I'm finally done with the introductory stuff. Would you briefly say hello? And then we'd love for you to, and I'm stealing a brilliant phrase from Jackie, extrovert your complexities. Tell us more about you and some of the complexities that are you. And I'll hand it first to Jackie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jackie Lewis, and I'm the Senior Minister at Middle Collegiate Church. That's not a complexity. It's a beautiful job, best one I've ever had. But I think I want to situate myself as a person who claims womanism as my theological orientation, which means I'm for the liberation of all the folks. As a grandmother, which is a beautiful new-ish gift. 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old baby belong to me now. And that has really complexified my life. They are two biracial babies, one named after Octavius Cato, who was a freedom fighter and was martyred in Philadelphia for voting rights. So every time I'm thinking about elections, every time I'm thinking about votes, I'm thinking about Octavius and Ophelia, and their right to vote and their right to live lives free of racism and violence.
Hello everybody, my name is Padraig and I am from Ireland, and in Ireland I'm in the northwest of Ireland on the Fermanagh-Donegal border, if any of you know that. I think something about Complexify for me is that all of my academic work was in very, very conservative religion, and I still turn to the book of Leviticus because it has so many lessons for life. I think there are so many ways within which the complex books of biblical texts have amazing and sometimes shocking insights for how we live today, because I think most of those texts were written in a community in crisis looking to wisdom. So often I think that coming absolutely from the left as I do, there can be this imagination that you just look to those texts and discount them. I, as a Catholic, sometimes Catholic, I find some of the old prayers from the Irish language tradition and some of the insights from Hebrew Bible to be something, and Christian text as well, to be fundamentally necessary when it comes to shaping your moral viewpoint in the world today. So. Another thing about me is that while English is my dominant language, I can't go through any sentence without thinking about it in Irish. And so, and recognizing Irish as a language that has been under pressure, I tend to think wherever I am of what are the languages that have been indigenous here that have been either forced into extinction or put under unnecessary or extreme pressure.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roxanne, and I am the managing editor at Religion News Service. I live in New York City, and I think one of the things that is a complexity in my life is that, well, I now live in New York City. I am from a town of 100 people in rural Colorado that is primarily farmers and ranchers. And so there are more people on my block now than in my whole
Wow.
hometown.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucas Johnson, and I'm the executive director of the Civil Conversations and Social Healing at On Being. And I think about one of the complexities for me in my life is that I think I've always sort of moved between sort of spaces. I grew up. My father was in the army, and I was born in Germany and lived there until I was 8, and then we moved to Hinesville, Fort Stewart, Georgia, on the coast of Georgia near Savannah, where I grew up. And I sort of always had that kind of sort of third culture experience where you're sort of not fully inside, not fully outside, to what's happening around you. And another way that that was true is that I grew up with my parents being a part of two strong Black Christian traditions. My mother was AME and my father was Progressive National Baptist, and both had strong teachings around our moral responsibility with respect to the poor and with respect to the oppressed, and that was a part of my formation. And I also grew up spending a lot of time at Southern Baptist congregations, and I got introduced to a kind of evangelical piety in that context. And so I have sort of a hybrid of spiritual influences that are a part of my formation. And so, similar to my upbringing in Europe and where I live now, actually, I'm speaking to you from Amsterdam, and to my Georgia roots, and then also the kind of theological complexities in those spaces. So,
Thank you, all four of you. We're just so glad you're here, and I'm so grateful for this conversation. Jackie, we'll start this first question to you. We received so many advanced questions, so many really great questions from folks who are here and who registered. Many of them fall under the category of how might faith leaders and faith communities lean towards being helpful rather than hurtful right now?
Well, thanks, Katie, for giving me that one first. I'm just back from the television screen watching some news reports around the election right now. And the last vision was of Rudy Giuliani making the case that votes had been stolen and sent to Germany to be counted. Maybe I think one of the most helpful things for faith communities to do is to just traffic in honesty. To thinking about Padraig, let's lean on these texts. This kind of sense that the truth will set us free. That the whole code in the scripture is geared toward helping us love our neighbor as ourselves, as we love our God with everything we have. And that's about not bearing false witness. And that's about kind of being kind and generous and good to each other. It's so basic, but it doesn't happen. And especially in such this polarized environment, sadly, I think religion takes on the culture as opposed to speaking to the culture about an ethic of love. So what I think could be really helpful right now would be to encourage our people to, frankly, listen to several sources of news, ask themselves what makes sense, invite them to be in conversation with people that are different than they are, because then we listening and learning and our minds can be expanded and stretched. And to pray, Katie, because these are some hot mess times. And I think it would be really good for us to be prayerful as we help our people navigate these difficulties of COVID and political distress.
Yeah, thank you. It is so clearly a moment for our best selves, for really pulling deep. And
Find
Padre,
yourself wanting to go, let's be nicer.
yes, yes. And even telling ourselves that I'm not proud of that. I find myself a lot really needing to lean into that. And Padre, just so watching America from the outside, as someone, not only your outsider perspective, but as someone who is experienced in conflict negotiation and in times when your own nation was experiencing severe conflict, what are you seeing now?
Well, first of all, I'm a foreigner, and I have some thoughts about what I see in America, but I am not from there, and I have never lived there. And I would always think that the first disposition should be to listen and to learn to people who are in a country that I might have an opinion about. But I would always default my opinion to be in great need of learning more. It does seem to me that in the United States, but in many places here too, that there has become a civic addiction to this idea of bipartisanship, as if bipartisanship is the culmination of something. And the problem with that is that it's the imagination that there are two sides, and which, that the two sides can come together. There are so many more than two sides. There's two sides in me. There's 20 sides in me. And I think we need structures that can show that you can't divide everything down the middle. Here's this group of people here, and here's that group of people here. And so I think that has just become accepted in many situations in the world. And I think some of the best outcomes is where coalitions can be built. Like in Ireland, I was just thinking there, we have immediately 6 political parties come to mind, each of which has held different amount of power at times, and where I can't remember the last time we didn't have a coalition government, and where parties have to be in negotiation with each other to come to some kind of compromise that's acceptable to their membership to vote in favour of that. And I think that is a really helpful understanding about what democracy can look like. And democracy only begins in the idea of majority win. So if you get to 50.1 or you get to that 270 of the Electoral College, that's only the beginning of democracy. It's not the achievement of it. There is so much more about democracy. There's consensus building. There's supermajority building. There's ways within which you can find ways to, not just because you have to, but because you want to, find ways to meet together with people who have shared common interests. And I think all of those things globally are in need. We're in need of being reminded that these things work and these things are for the benefit of the people. And finally, I suppose I would say that seeing the United States, it can sometimes feel like you're hearing some people who are very aware that the past is not the past because it's very alive now, and other folks for whom the idea of the future is there and you can just put the past behind you. And I think that's a luxury. If you can think you can put the past behind you, well, then you probably haven't been overly affected by the past systematically. And there are entire populations of people who have inherited trauma. And I think the past is not the past for people for whom the past was never acknowledged. And there therefore needs to be a way within which there is civic reckoning, and a recognition of civic accountability in terms of paying attention to that. And I see that in the United States. And what happens in a two-party system, I think, is that you therefore have these massive traumas and truths. And because there's this addiction to say, are you for or against this? You therefore begin to debate whether justice should be enacted or not. Justice is not up for debate. And a two-party system makes it feel like there's always a for side and an against side. And that is a failure, I think.
Yep. And it is so just endemically human to go good, bad, yes,
Yeah,
no,
totally.
me, them.
Yeah, and I say this because I'm mostly speaking about Ireland when I say that, and I think, oh yeah, America's just bigger and louder, but we have the same thing here. So I do not kind of feel like I'm looking from over here, kind of diagnosing America. I feel like I'm here thinking, oh wow, what is happening in public global conversation where we are not being reminded often enough about what's possible in consensus building and in finding ways where we can do exciting, innovative, surprising things in public conversation rather than just win that damn debate.
Yeah. Yep. Wow, I think this actually transitions us beautifully, thinking about what is the surprising and the new, and getting us beyond winning the next debate. We had a question come in from Christine in Korea, and actually she pointed it specifically to Lucas. She said the intentional focus on social healing, and I think she's referring to the program, you all have it on being, on social healing rather than reconciliation or unity. And she says, I would be so curious to know why. So, because would you mind unpacking that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks for the question, Christine. Um, I think that um, one is I would describe reconciliation as a process that hopefully healing uh, is both a part of, and hopefully reconciliation results in healing, right? And so I think that we when we think about social healing, I think in the context of On Being, um, we're first of all trying to address and acknowledge some of what Padraig has just named, the deep levels of trauma and pain that are present with us in American life, in American society. We're thinking about the fact that there's there are that trauma sort of manifests itself in us, and it disorients ourselves to one another. And a part of what we have to do, or part of what we have to reconcile, is our relationship to one another, and that looks like healing. And so that's what we mean by that, and I think that's what we're thinking about that. But I think that the words relate to each other, and I think unity is something that unity is complicated, because I think that it functions in a similar way as to the way bipartisanship functions, in terms of what Padraig was just describing. I think sometimes we think about unity as an achievement that it can happen, or can mask some of the underlying pain and lack of understanding. And so I think true unity is maybe something achieved with healing and reconciliation.
That's beautifully put. And these words of, the two-ness, the all oneness, the multipleness, it's so helpful to keep on putting the different frameworks and to just have more clarity about what it is we're even talking about. And that brings us to Roxanne. I'm actually going to read 3 different questions, and they're so similar to each other. They're so overlapping. One is from Heather in Washington, D.C., and she says, how do we heal the fractures in our families and friends circles? Kathleen in Decatur, Georgia says, how do we handle political divides in our families? Ileana from Ontario says, how do you find common ground with someone whose worldview is so different from yours, it feels like you're on different planets? So as a journalist, Roxanne, what trends and stories are you seeing across the country right now that might help illuminate these questions?
Sure. So we're talking a lot today, and I've heard people talking about this, like, what is it, what does it look like to not be in a two-party system? What does it look like to blur these binaries, or to help people understand that everyone is complex, and they're neither left nor right is exactly right and exactly perfect or exactly going to be aligned with your worldview. And those are this is a super noble conversation, and I'm glad we're having it. And the context within which we're having it is one where people are really, really divided. And that's just the reality. And I think it's we're not just going to be able to jump past that and get to healing quickly, or have easy conversations around a Thanksgiving dinner table and solve this. And when we look at the numbers from this election, it was close. I mean, it wasn't close in the popular vote. I understand that. But in terms of just our electoral college, in terms of geographic areas in the country, it was a close election, and a lot of groups are divided on this. And then you have people, you have, for example, the oft talked about white evangelical vote, that, for all of the talk about it for the last 4 years, it didn't budge very much. It didn't change very much. And that's, I think, in some ways, just a testament to how slowly these kinds of things change and how hard it is to move people on issues like this. And that there was actually, over the last 4 years, a lot of doubling down, a lot of people on both sides actually polarizing more. And the stakes felt higher and higher. So it didn't feel, for a lot of people, it didn't feel like something like, I don't want to be in unity with somebody who, for a lot of minorities in this country, with someone whose beliefs feel like an existential threat to me. Why would I try to find unity with that group or those people? And we also see, when you look at the exit polls, and even in the pre-election polls, you see that people are living in and around people who vote like them. And so in a lot of ways, we don't go to church with people who think differently than us. We don't live near people who think differently than us. We don't actually converse with people who are different than us very often. And so those are big realities that we have to actually address, and actually figure out how do we even get to a point where we can talk to each other when we don't live, work, or worship with people who are different than us.
That hits home for me. Like that hits home for me as a faith leader and as a person. Jackie, I can tell you have a.
I just wanted to agree with Roxanne, and then add something about this moment where we might have an opportunity, where COVID crazy might have a benefit, which is that a lot of the people that we live close to, we've been talking to, but we're not going to get to see our relatives in person. And maybe we could set up some courageous conversations with our relatives. I remember in 2016 when Mr. Trump was elected, my church is a very multi-all the things church, and people felt just frankly hurt and wounded that their relatives had voted against them, is how it felt. So we created these questions for people to just say, I could say to Roxanne, you know what, Roxanne, can you tell me why you pulled the lever that you pulled? What's embedded in that? With a real sincere curiosity to say, tell me what you're dreaming about that makes you pull that lever. Tell me what you're hoping America will be like that makes you pull that lever. And maybe there's 2 or 3 questions we put in our back pocket, and we get to talk to Aunt Louise, because we're not going to get to see our next door, family, but we can get Aunt Louise and a few people in a Zoom, no kidding, and just ask the question. What are you dreaming about? And not be so judgmental, but to see if people will tell us what their dreams are, and maybe we can find some common space there. I just want to own, though, Padraig and Lucas, we can't rush to making up. That question isn't a make-up question. That question is an investigative question, I say to the journalists, right? It's just I want to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of research out there that shows if you do have relationships, people who have relationships with those who look differently than them, who believe differently than them, there's more empathy toward that group of people. I mean, the data is there that proves that. It's getting people to actually take those steps.
one of the, Jackie, what you just said also kind of harkened back for me to the first question that Katie asked you, because I'm thinking about the fact that, like, actually one of the roles that we can play as faith leaders is to really help our congregations imagine the questions that we need to be asking of ourselves and asking of each other in this moment, right? I think that's one of the reasons why we got here, is because we kept asking the wrong questions. We kept allowing leaders and politicians to give us the wrong questions to be asking each other, and that's part of our problem. And that's one of the things that I think it's going to take for us to reshape our democracy, is for us to rediscover the questions that we really need to be asking of ourselves and each other in this time.
That's right, Lucas. Yeah. And
Padraig, did you? Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, yeah, just yes. That's right.
So, I mean, like, the north of Ireland is profoundly polarized. I live right on the border. And one of the things that we have become accepting of here is that if we have people who disagree with each other profoundly about politics and place, that therefore we accept that they won't be able to speak with each other in public. And we accept that they will perform their difference with each other in a way that does not imagine curiosity. I loved what Jackie said in terms of curiosity is an extraordinarily powerful word. Sometimes we invite people to think, what would it be like if you asked a question of the other side, a question that you don't know the answer to? Because typically I think, well, I know my story about you, and I believe my story about you more than your story about you. And what would it be like to highlight that arrogance, really, and to think, can I ask a question? Can I hear what it's like for somebody to hear the story I tell about them? And what would it be like to believe each other in and shape each other and say the kind of things to each other, knowing that adventurous conversation is actually much more demanding than using a stereotype about each other. And I do think that needs to be modelled. If that's happening on every public level, well, then why would we expect it to happen in families? Whereas if you see the possibility of people doing strange things to each other in terms of public and moving towards each other with curiosity, it can show, look at what's possible. When one of our politicians died, there was this whole debate as to whether another politician from a different party would go to the funeral, because she was a Protestant, the fellow that died was a Catholic, and she comes from a denomination that would say you shouldn't go to a Catholic funeral. And so will I, won't I, went on and on and on. And it seemed insulting to just think, my God, the most basic level of civic respect would be to turn up to a funeral. You're not saying that you want to become a Catholic, just turn up for God's sake. And when she did turn up, and the two leaders of the two parties, both women, were seen to shake hands with each other during the sign of peace, a photograph was taken that went viral, and it showed the thirst for demonstrating, look at what's possible on the most basic level. And that photograph did more, not to do away with differences. People would still vote differently, but it was showing, as you vote differently, here's how you can hold differences and difficult differences differently. And it gave so much hope. And then it went back to the predictable.
Yeah. And this is a great. There was a question that came in from Sharon, and she said, "How do we, as faithful people, overcome the desire to avoid people who are so fundamentally different than we are?" So what I'm hearing y'all say is that it has imagination and tapping into curiosity, like finding it, which can. Sometimes it can feel like, yes, this is my best self, but I can be curious. And then other times it can feel real tough. And it can feel really tough. What about religious imagination in this? Like in terms of like what can help us? So curiosity, I think it goes back to the question of like, how can religion help right now? Any thoughts on that, Jackie? Yeah.
The word religion, Brian McLaren reminded me, comes from the Latin religere, rebind, reconnect. I love that. So what can religion do? I mean, Roxanne's a storyteller, Patrick a poet, Lucas and I are faith leaders along with Katie. That means we are griots, we're storytellers. The foundational story of this imaginative thing called Judeo-Christian life is that there is some kind of holy other that created us out of love. So that, like, I love leaning into that, just that I have the divine imprint in me, that so do you, and so does that person over there who I don't understand. If I can picture your divine spark when I'm looking in your face. To love another person is to see the face of God. To see another face is to see the face of God. If I can just picture that you are also loved by divine, I think that's the beginning of something, that the curiosity that Patrick and I are talking about. Like, so what's the particular wiring of you, your story? Your story is not my opinion. Your story is your story. And we could just learn, religious people, to create spaces for people to do storytelling, structured storytelling. I was born here. My grandmother taught me. My dad worked at. Like, just get the story straight, I think, puts flesh on our religion in a way.
I'm reminded of ever since I read it, and I can't remember when I came across this quote from Howard Thurman. I think it's in, I can't remember where exactly it's in. I feel badly about that. I think it's maybe in Inward Journey in his book, but he says something to the effect that true religious experience not only sends one into life, but sends one into lives. And I can't help but think about, like, that there's something about this experience of the transcendent other that just has the capacity to open one up to the world around them, right? To open one up to, like, seek greater, sort of, to see the beauty in the world around them, and greater understand, and, like, to seek greater understanding. I mean, it I think religious experience awakens curiosity in us because we've encountered something so profoundly other than ourselves. And I feel like there's real power in that. There's real ability for us to 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 make use of that if we allow ourselves to be opened up in that way. And so I think that there's incredible wisdom, incredible resources in our faith traditions, that would really equip us to be able to connect with one another, and that prepare us for this day, for this moment, for this time. I really feel that.
And I think, to go back to what Roxanne was saying about how, no matter how we position it in our heads and think about it, like, if there's just work to be done in terms of conversations to be had. And but it does seem like that these places where, personally, if we identify ourselves as people of one faith tradition or another, going real deep and thinking about what it means to cross lines of difference does seem important, because that'll get us to the possibly ordinary conversation with somebody we sort of know in the grocery store that we run into, masked, of course, and distanced, or the family conversation that we get on a Zoom with, or help, even, it can be so small, helping somebody else, a neighbor who we know has a bunch of folks in their family who voted differently, helping them think through how they are going to have conversations.
When you look at the religious vote, there's in some ways only one religious bloc that stands out in the fact that it's inconsistent in its voting pattern and is divided almost 50-50, and that's the Catholic voting bloc, which isn't really a voting bloc in a lot of ways. Evangelicals have voted Republican for decades. The Black Church has voted Democrat for decades. The Jewish vote primarily goes Democrat, with a few differences, but And I've been thinking about that a lot this last week, about what is it about the Catholic vote that it doesn't coalesce around a politic. And what I think is curious about it is that the Catholic social teaching is deep and centuries old, and it might be very, there are divisions in the Catholic Church. I'm not pretending there aren't. There are some big ones, especially right now. But the Catholic social teaching is incredibly robust, and neither Democrats nor Republicans fit very comfortably within that. So you have an a deep belief in that abortion is wrong and immoral and murder. You also have a deep belief that the death penalty is wrong and immoral and murder. And you have a belief that, we should be welcoming to the refugees, and also a belief that assisted suicide is wrong. So you have these issues that fall on both sides of the political spectrum, and yet they're sitting in pews together and are voting differently because they maybe prioritize one, or they're weighing that vote in a way. And I think what I find that interesting, because I do think that it's borne out in the data that, and in the inconsistency of that vote in terms of being able to be swayed fully one way or the other, that there is something about the way that the Catholic Church, at least globally, is able to prioritize their faith and these social teachings over making political ideology the priority or the main identifier.
Thank you. That's helpful. I want to touch on one topic that we've gotten a couple questions about, that it changes this up a little bit, which is about extremism and hate. So Emily in Charlottesville, Virginia, says, how do you listen when others are being hateful? How do you balance letting everyone speak and protecting people subject to hate? And I think, we've been talking a little bit about this, but specifically on that, when we're in the presence of what feels hateful, and I think that if some of us imagine, Zooming with extended family members, like what do you pay attention to? What do you do in situations where we're crossing these lines of difference and it just crosses an internal line?
I think I wanted to say first, Katie, because I feel like that's in the subtext of the question, is like, we're actually not required to run up and hug the person that's trying to kill us. We're just really not required to do that. Not at all. And so let's own that when something feels abusive, feels violent, feels like you're in a threat, and it feels that way. Who said existential threat, Patrick, when it first got started? You're just not required to be in that conversation. And you might not start in that conversation, but when you get to that place in the conversation, I think you get to say, as respectfully as you can, I statements. We all have learned, I'm feeling super uncomfortable right now, and I have to go and protect yourself. That's how you stay alive in your soul, one. And two, even religion is violence, some of it, right? Some of us are in these religious spaces where it's a violent experience. I say often, so I'm going to say here, Christianity, my religion, is chock full of white supremacy and patriarchy, chock full of xenophobia and homophobia. So those places violate me, and so I just want to say that out loud. And then I think maybe the third really quick piece of that, Katie, is you got to trust your own sense of what's fair, just, acceptable, good enough for you, so you can create a conversation. Like, right, I got to have a certain kind of regard for Lucas to talk to Lucas. One definition of love is a non-possessive delight in the unique particularity of the other. If I'm going to approach Lucas for a conversation, I have to start with a respect for me and a respect for him. To me, those are rules of engagement. And so I think those three things, we can't pretend that it's not real. Some stuff is disrespectful, some stuff is violent, some stuff is not safe. And we got to find the place in between those for talking. Did I overshare there, Katie? Was that too much?
Nope, you did not. Love it.
I wanted to jump in and other than amen to what Reverend Jackie just said, I wanted to also just say that like a couple of things. One is that we're not all equally positioned to do the same work all the time, right? And there are times when someone else is better suited to have that conversation. And there are times when, today I'm feeling strong enough in myself to have that conversation, and tomorrow I may not be, right? Because I don't have it in me to show up in the way that I need to show up for that conversation. Or I'm just not feeling strong enough because of the inherent sort of, power and equity and that's involved in the conversation or something, which is often a dynamic. I think that a lot of times, we are so dependent on disempowered people absorbing the blows in order to stop the cycle of violence. And we have no right to to feel entitled to that, right? And yet our lives are dependent on it happening. And it is a remarkable grace that people sometimes are able to meet violence with that, without returning it. So, we have to make those decisions ourselves about how we can show up to a given conversation. But we're not always positioned to do that, and we're not always positioned to do that all the time. And then the other thing that I was going to say is that I think it's important sometimes people are having conversations with other people, even when they're talking to you. And so as a practical tool, sometimes with family and friends and others, I have to remind people that it's me that they're talking to, right? And they're not yelling at a television. They're not arguing with like all the people that they disagreed with in whatever coverage of whatever event. I'm not here for them to rehearse talking points. I have to remind them that we're here because of our relationship, and we're just talking, right? This is not a contest. We're just talking. And part of what has to happen is we have to reorient our position in relationship to the thing we're talking about, to where we're both curious and trying to get at the truth together. And if we can sort of shift that orientation, then the conversation can go a lot better. Because sometimes the people that are performing hateful things are directing it towards people that aren't even in the room.
Yeah, and I think
that's fantastic.
It's super good. It is. I'm thinking about that for myself because I know I do that too. It's not, I can go home and, have conversations with people in my rural hometown and feel like I'm, talking at an image that's been portrayed to me or at a whole thing that's been dehumanized in terms of being disembodied from a particular person. And I think it challenges me too, as someone in the media, because I think the media carries a lot of responsibility for otherizing the people who vote differently than you, and in part sensationalizing or mythologizing or even romanticizing people from either camp to a point where it feels like the mythical Trump voter is this stereotype, and the mythical Black Lives Matter protester is this stereotype and is absolutely a Marxist and is absolutely rioting, you know, and then the rural Trump farmer is absolutely racist and is, you know, absolutely uneducated and watching Fox News or whatever it is, you know. So I think as media, that's a challenge for us, to be really careful when we're writing our stories and telling other people's stories.
This really makes me think too of, and I have permission to share this. Dr. Zachary Moon is at Chicago Theological. He is Quaker, and he trained non-combatant in the military and helps train military, does chaplain training for folks to be military chaplains. And he talked before the election about the usness that happens in military training. For one thing, within the culture of military, there is actually a long tradition of overcoming lines of difference, of being in relationship across lines of difference, and really ways we can learn from. But he said that the thing that worried him going into the election was that to remember that a lot of times the usness that's created between one group, it isn't necessarily even as much about hatred of the other. It's about this firm usness. And he talked about the usness that has to be created when you are willing to jump in front of a bullet for somebody, and that no matter what the difference, race, class, who you love, any of the lines of difference between that and the person you're saving. He says, so it's just incredible what does happen in these strong relationships, but it's when the usness is threatened, then like you are ready to do anything. And it just made me think about like, what is threatened? And it brings me back to the questions Jackie was posing about things we could ask of, what do you dream about? Who are you and what are you? And what feels so threatened? Listening for what feels so threatened that would make you feel so anti another group. Patrick?
Oh, I think some of that is about the imagination of the other. The French writer Hélène Cixous does a feminist critique of, in literature and conflict resolution and politics and religion often too, there's this idea that what we have to do is to move toward the other. Okay. And she's saying, even in the idea of moving towards the other, you're expecting that that's going to be a demand. And she says, when she's writing, she says, I'm a woman. I've taken another into my body and I've pushed another out of my body. Therefore, the other doesn't represent to me a bridge to be crossed. The other represents a situation about what it's like to be an embodied person. And so fundamentally, I think there does need to be a pushing and a critique of the idea that automatically the other is the oppositional other, because that's often just taken as a short code, that other equals oppositional other. And I think what we can do is to realize, actually, no, we already live with a vibrancy and an argument of being with all these kinds of other others where it isn't oppositional, even though there may not be consensus. So in contexts in Ireland, we've often brought together people, all of whom would have been in paramilitary organisations, or the phrase we might use is that people who've taken up arms, whether as a result of being in the police or in the army or in a paramilitary organisation here, and brought people together in a strange kind of gathering to say, let's hold our differences together and let's find ways within which unexpected alliances can be established and then tensed and then untensed, and where you realize actually my belonging moves depending as to what we're talking about. So I'm not just looking to say, what group can I belong to? And I'll belong to them forever. And I'll be kicked out if I break a particular rule, rather than saying, well, in this part of my life, I belong here. In this part of my life, I belong here. And that there is plural forms of belonging. And when you can populate the idea in tense rooms like that of recognizing that there are plural alliances going on, and then to say to folks, what are the alliances that are happening here that you probably would feel a little bit awkward naming? And to go, take a risk. Like, this is a safe room. We're not broadcasting it. It's not being live tweeted. Like, who is hearing something here where they would go, this is awkward for me to say it, but actually I'm really hearing what you're saying and going, I want to learn more. So typically in paramilitary organizations here, you would have a member of a paramilitary organization on one side that would say, I'm absolutely pro-Zionist, and a member of a paramilitary organization on the other side that would say, I'm absolutely pro-Palestinian. And so we brought Palestinians and Israelis, Zionists, together in a room together with paramilitary members from Ireland, North and South, and we created all kinds of unexpected connections. And so at one point, one of the Zionists said to one of the Irish Republicans, I hear what you're saying, and I just think, my God, you're speaking about the Zionist dream. And the Irish Republican was like, you're not supposed to say that. Like, the Palestinians are supposed to say that to me, not you. And that takes careful curation, but really it's the preparation. And then you get out of the way and hope that with good, simple facilitation, the kinds of things that Jackie was talking about, the kind of possibility of unexpected differences and unexpected alliances are made evident. And those aren't permanent. That's the point. It's not that I've changed my mind about you and now, magnificent, let's get married. Exactly. It's just saying, wow, there was even a temporary alliance set up, and I need to pay attention to that. Just before I finish, back to the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus speaks a lot about kicking people out of the camp, and that's so interesting. But it also always speaks about bringing people back in. And that, I think, is something to pay attention to. There is so much these days about kicking people out of the camp. And I think, I mean, obviously, sometimes the book of Leviticus says stone them. So it's not always about bringing them back into the camp. But there is situations where it does have an ethic to say, and here's what reintroduction, here's an imagination of relationship that goes beyond the infraction. And I think that is a really important thing.
How often do we remember that the book of Leviticus says anything about bringing people back? I don't know that. Jackie?
When Patrick was talking about, well, telling that story, what was in my imagination is this idea of internal family systems, or something like all the Jackies that are in here. I'll just do me, you know. But in a way, the reason we end up with Roxana saying like yes, no, us, them, like these binaries come from our base brain, fear, survival, you know, y'all are mine and you're not kind of place. But the complexities of just our own internal stuff. Like my Jackie that has become queer. I'm the queerest straight Black woman in America because of my life experience at Middle Church, right? But that Jackie wasn't always queer, you know. That object's inside me. I'm married to a white United Methodist minister. I'm a Presbyterian, so we're in a mixed relationship, you know. So that's inside me. They're inside each of us. Patrick is saying the reason you can end up partnering here or joining here is because we have multiplicities of selves, multiplicities of self-interests. And I wonder if we could be a people who could help our people own more of their complexities, is what I'm trying to get at. Because like a faith community's job could be, let me help you own all of the yous, your self-interests that are varied, so that you then have compassion for the multiplicities of Patrick, you know, and maybe possibly align ourselves with the sameness, is one point I want to make about complexity. And the other thing is, before it goes too far in the chat, also, some people don't like you, you know? And some people are mean to you, and some people are racist, and some people have more power over you, and those people want to have dominion on our bodies and on our souls. And that just sucks. That's my theological term for that. That just kind of sucks. And so how do we hold together, again, the multiplicity of truth and reconciliation? You know, kind of candor and curiosity. Not fake pretend I'm not wounded and you didn't step on my neck or have your knee on my neck, because you did. And that's America. And that's Ireland. That's all the places where people have been hurt and wounded. And so we have to also really own how hard that is for the people who've been hurt and wounded.
And I think I love that you're responding to the chat, at which you know, I see Elizabeth's question in the chat. How does the question is, how do we broaden the definition of usness, and how do we acknowledge that all situations are not inclusive? I hear you saying, and I'm internal family systems. What? I love it so much.
Every
But
now and then you have to pull your little PhD out and
oh
say
my
something
God,
smart
I
from
love
your.
it. I love.
Thank you,
I
Sue.
mean, that's just my particular corner of geekdom. But broadening the sense of usness means understanding that we are broad inside.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
part of it. And Roxanne, were
That's what I
you?
was gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, it was a question a ways back somebody had asked, and I don't want to scroll back up, but you know, I think a lot of this sense of usness that really morphs into a violent tribalism is I mean, it's exacerbated by fear mongering that is happening. It comes out of a rhetoric of fear and a amping up those fears and continuing to keep people feeling like they're in a panic and like they are in an existential threat. And some people actually are, and then some people have just had their fears like the flames fan so much. Today, this is a new poll out from Public Religion Research Institute today. And so I just saw it today, so I may not get the stats exactly right. So I'm just going to describe them. But they polled Fox News viewers, Fox News Republicans, non-Fox News watching Republicans, and then all Americans. And one of the questions that they asked was, do you believe that X group of Americans is discriminated against? And Fox News watching Republicans said that like 78% of them, I think, said that Christians are discriminated against. And over, I think 56 or 57% of them said that white people are discriminated against in America. They said only 38% of them said that Black people are discriminated against in America. And obviously among all Americans and non-Fox watching Republicans, those numbers were basically reversed. And I bring that up not to be like bad Fox News, but well, maybe I did. But I mean, there's some, I mean, that's a fear that's been fanned, the flame of that fear. And it's not a real fear. It's not in the, you know, there's not evidence for those numbers. That's not reality. And that's the kind of thing that when you see things like that, that alarms me, because that's the kind of thing that's driven historically a lot of violence, and historically things like dictators being able to take a control of a nation based on fear of an other. And it's the kind of thing that incites a sense of true, like, this person is truly actually my enemy. We don't just think differently. This person is my enemy. And churches have real work to do to combat that, because those are the people that are mostly sitting in their pews who think that. So that's real work that has to be done, and a sort of deprogramming or counter programming to what they're maybe hearing all week long. And they're leaving Fox News for even more like conservative kind of fringe places.
Yeah, and I would say that, I mean, part of the challenge, I think, for Christianity is to deal with the way that our roots in a history of persecution get lent towards that narrative where we always cast ourselves as the persecuted, and how that ends up being this, you know, a part of our piety is to feel persecuted, and how that ends up feeding into this dynamic. I think that's something for us to deal with, but that's a theological struggle that maybe we don't need to go into here, but I think that's one of the problems. I think the other thing that I wanted to speak to in response to the question, though, is also that there is a way that I think we need to talk about. I mean, it relates to everything that what Padraig and Jackie were saying, that like, yes, we are complicated, we are multiple sort of selves, and there are, there. I used to say that my first act of conscientious objection was to refuse to go to war against myself, right? And
Ooh, I like that.
that is a part of what we have to do. But I think that we need to deal with identity formation, right? We need to deal with the fact that part of what's happening is that part of what feels threatened is that how we formed our sense of ourself, and sometimes that needs to change, right? And so, as for me, as a male, as a man, like, I can be threatened by feminism if I think that I am defined, and that the definition of my maleness is only comes through contrast with women, right? Like there's a way in which I have to think differently, and root my identity in a more complex understanding of gender, right? In order for me to not feel threatened by that. And I think that our religious traditions give us some tools to help us have a more expansive sense of identity, and help us look to a more expansive sense of belonging and connection than our national politics would allow for.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yes, that, ooh, good button. That there are tools within religious traditions to help us expand the way our understandings of how we're formed, our experiences of how we're formed. Oh, clearly this conversation is so needed. There's so many questions from the chat we didn't get to. These are not lost. We save all of these. We continue to wrestle and think about them and talk with partners, and they help us guide future conversations. Now we can move to this fun, I said there's a surprise. It is a little bit of a surprise. We are just we'd love to hear from each of the four of you of words of wisdom that are fueling your well, keeping you going, inspiring you. You can frame that however you'd want, but just some nuggets. And then we didn't let Padraig have a choice about what we really need a poem from him. So we'll end with that. Who wants to go first? Jackie's first on my screen. Jackie, do you mind going first?
I think I'm going to say this. I was going to sing it, but that Zoom doesn't work well on Zoom. So, words to a song penned by Titus Burgess. You and I are the ones we've been waiting for. Inspired by June Jordan. I sat back waiting, anticipating. At some point, change would begin. But then it hit me, I was what was missing. My weight was dead. That's why we couldn't get ahead. So no more delays, that all ends today. It don't have to be so heavy. If you'll carry your weight, you and I are the ones we've been waiting for. You and I thought this was somebody else's war. You and I, we're the ones we've been waiting for. Hooked by a promise. Just hold on, change is coming, but hope alone won't bring about the change. We are God's feet, God's hands and heartbeat. God in the flesh. Let's press full steam ahead. You and I are the ones we've been waiting for. You and I thought this was somebody else's war. You and I, we're the ones we've been waiting for. Welcome album, iTunes.
Yeah. So I wasn't going to I have something to share too, but this is my daily inspiration, or at least comfort. This is Oliver Twist, who was a stray, and he was found shivering in the pouring rain, pawing at a church door. So that's how he came to be in my life. But I will share this. I had this quote from Walter Brueggemann that I think is great, both for what we're talking about today, which is not the reality that we live in right now, but a reality that we're hoping for, and also to give to preface Padraig reading his poem. He writes that poets have no advice to give people. They only want people to see differently, to revision life. They are not coercive. They only try to stimulate, hint, give nuance, not more. They cannot do more because they are making available a world that does not yet exist beyond their imagination.
Love that. And love that dog.
He's great.
Oh my God. Lucas.
He's adorable.
Oh my God.
I'm so jealous, Roxanne. So what's been giving me inspiration lately, or what's just been sort of like kind of lingering in my mind, it's not one quote, it's a series, it's a calling back to a tradition that I see myself in, a tradition of believing, a tradition of imagining, and hoping. And so part of it is, it's that Langston Hughes quote that, the America will be, the poem by Langston Hughes, and sort of thinking about sort of that I swear to you, it will be, right? America has never been America to me, but I swear to you, it will be. So all that's captured in that sort of resolute, like, conviction, that commitment to bringing it into being, that's what's really resonating with me. I'm reminded of Vincent Harding's words to me, that they didn't do all that they did just so that I could rest. And just the fact that, like, this is something that, democracy is something that we have to work at, and it's relentless, and it's tiresome. It's a lot of work, but the reward is worth it. And so I've been inspired by that tradition, and it's just been sort of appearing in snippets for me all week, and that's what's giving me energy.
It's been such a joy to be together with everybody here. So here's a poem called How to Be Alone. It always strikes me that when I'm doing conflict mediation, even with people who are profoundly oppositional to each other in terms of how they think or vote or where they are or how they measure the impact of their thoughts, etc., that it's those people who have a practice of prayer, of walking, of yoga, of writing, those people who have a practice of being alone with themselves are the ones who seem to be demonstrating something very powerful in a group context. And I always think that the capacity to belong safely and wisely and critically to a group is in proportion to your capacity to belong safely and wisely and critically to yourself. So here's a poem called How to Be Alone. It all begins with knowing nothing lasts forever. So you might as well start packing now. In the meantime, practice being alive. There will be a party where you'll feel like nobody's paying you attention. And there will be a party where attention is all you'll get. What you need to do is to remember to talk to yourself between these parties. And again, there will be a day, a decade, where you won't fit in with your body, even though you're in the only body you're in. You need to control your habit of forgetting to breathe. Remember when you were younger and you practiced kissing on your arm? You were onto something then. Sometimes harm knows its own healing. Comfort knows its own intelligence. Kindness too. It needs no reason. There is a you telling you another story of you. Listen to her. Where do you feel anxiety in your body? The chest, the fist, the dream before waking, the head that feels like it's at the top of the swing, or the clutch of gut like falling and falling and falling and falling. It knows something. You're dying. Try to stay alive. For now, touch yourself. I'm serious. Touch yourself. Take your hand and place your hand someplace upon your body and listen to the community of madness that you are. You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here.
Yes, Jackie's face, that's what I have.
Wow.
In closing, thank you, all four of you, for the unique and interesting multiplicity that each of you are, and that you shared with all of us. Just to remind everyone, this entire event has been recorded and it'll be available as a free resource on Odyssey's Healing the Healer's website. Everybody who registered will receive a link by email when the recording has been prepared. Please feel free to share it. An enormous thank you to our two partners. It does take a lot of work and thinking to put these things together, and the On Being Project and Religion News Service have been such excellent partners. It's no small task collaborating between three very busy organizations. And you four panelists, come on. It's a thrill to just be alongside you. So thank you to everyone for joining, and may we all go forth with our multiplicities and see the divine in others. Bye for now.
Thank you all.